The sea rolled heavy that morning, each wave lifting the fishing boat high before dropping it again with a hollow thud against the water. The men on board were accustomed to such rhythm, their eyes trained to the shifting surface, reading the language of foam and current. But beneath the restless swells, something stirred, something larger than the rise and fall of the tide itself. At first it was only a shadow, dark and unmoving, stretching wide beneath the ripples. One of the fishermen leaned closer, his brow furrowed, the net in his hands forgotten. The shadow did not scatter like a school of fish. It lingered, vast and deliberate, as though the sea was holding its breath. When it rose, the water parted in silence, revealing the immense body of a whale shark. Its spotted skin shimmered faintly under the filtered light, but its movements were labored, heavy with unseen weight. The fisherman stood still, struck not by fear but by the quiet gravity of its struggle. The giant, a creature known for grace and calm, drifted at the surface as though anchored. Its broad tail barely swayed, its dorsal fin tilted awkwardly with each swell. Then they saw the lines. Thick ropes, ragged and weathered, bit deep into its fins, trailing back into the sea. The cords had wrapped around its body like chains, digging grooves into flesh that should have been free to move with the tide. Each turn of the shark's body revealed more. The marks of struggle, the dragging of debris still tangled, the way its great head tilted as though weighed down by something it could not shake. For a long moment, no one moved. The sea roared around them, but the deck of the boat remained hushed, the men watching as if the ocean itself had set a plea before them. The whale shark lifted slightly, its mouth opening in a slow rhythm as it took in water, its gills straining against the pull of the lines. Its small, dark eye drifted upward, catching light for the briefest instant. The fishermen exchanged glances. They were men used to taking from the sea, hauling its gifts into their nets with practiced hands. But here was no catch. Here was a life held captive by what had been left behind. Ropes discarded, forgotten, yet carrying the weight of suffering across the currents. One of them whispered low, not to be heard by the others, but simply to soften the moment. "Easy, boy." The words carried no command, only an offering of calm. The boat shifted again with the swell, bringing them closer. The fishermen saw the shark's tail lift half-heartedly before sinking again, the water frothing weakly at its side. There was power in its body still, but it was buried beneath exhaustion, dulled by the tightness of the lines. Every movement promised strength, but every attempt faltered, restrained by what clung mercilessly to its flesh. One man pointed toward the ropes, his hand steady despite the roll of the boat. Another nodded, his jaw set in quiet resolve. There was no discussion of whether or not to act, only how, for in that moment the choice had already been made. The shadow they had first seen was no longer just a shape below the waves. It was a life bound in silence, waiting for hands willing to help. The sea pressed against the boat as if testing their patience, the wind rushing across their faces. Still they stayed, eyes fixed on the giant that drifted just beyond reach. The whale shark lingered there, breathing in slow, visible effort, the ropes cutting deeper with every turn of its massive body. The fishermen knew the ocean's dangers well, yet what held them was not fear of what might happen. It was the certainty that leaving would mean the shadow would sink again, alone, pulled further into quiet struggle. And so they waited, watching the tide carry the shark closer to their side, the water slapping gently against the hull. The ropes strained against its skin. The waves tugged at its weight, but still it hovered. A living giant caught between survival and surrender. The fishermen did not yet move, but they leaned forward as one, the decision already carried in their stillness. The shadow below the waves had risen to meet them, and it would not be left unseen. The sea heaved and fell around the boat, its rhythm steady yet relentless, a vast body breathing beneath the storm-gray sky. The fishermen leaned over the edge, their eyes following the slow roll of the whale shark as it turned in the water. The lines that bound it trailed behind like anchors, heavy and merciless, each swell tugging against them, pulling deeper into its flesh. The ropes had cut grooves across its fins, pale scars of friction where soft skin met coarse fiber. Salt water washed over the wounds with every movement, but there was no relief in it, only sting and pressure, an unending reminder of the weight it carried. The shark moved sluggishly, its tail sweeping once, then faltering. The motion that should have propelled its massive frame through the currents instead dragged the entangled lines into the swell. Water foamed where they trailed, the sea itself seeming to resist the pull of what clung to it. For all its size and strength, the creature moved as though caught in invisible nets, its power drained with every attempt to rise above the waves. The fisherman could see the strain in the way its body listed to one side, unable to balance against the drag. They had seen creatures struggle before, nets filled with fish, dolphins tangled by chance, but never a being of such scale, such quiet dignity brought low by something so careless. They spoke little, only watching, the gravity of the moment pressing against them heavier than the rocking of the sea. The shark's gills flared in long, measured breaths, each one a visible effort. Its mouth opened and closed slowly, water rushing in, then spilling out again, the rhythm faltering against exhaustion. For a moment, it drifted almost still, the lines holding it as if the ocean itself had tethered the giant in place. Then, with a tremor of effort, it rolled weakly to one side, and for the first time its eye turned toward the boat. It was small compared to its body, a dark, unblinking circle, yet it carried something that held the men still. It was not a plea, not something human, but the simple weight of presence, a life aware, a life enduring. The fishermen did not look away. They had seen strength in the sea before, but rarely such quiet exhaustion, the kind that spoke without sound. The boat pitched with another wave, lifting and dropping as the wind pressed harder across the water. One of the fishermen shifted, steadying himself, his hand brushing the rope coiled near his feet. His gaze did not leave the shark. "Easy now," he murmured, almost to the sea itself. The words were soft, lost in the wind, but they carried the shape of patience, not command. Below them, the shark shuddered once, a ripple passing down its long body, then stilled again. The ropes dragged across its skin with each movement, their weight relentless, but it did not thrash. Its strength remained coiled within, unspent, trapped beneath fatigue and the cutting grip of the lines. The fishermen knew that sudden violence could turn the sea against them, yet no such force came. Only the slow, deliberate movements of a giant, weary but enduring. The men leaned closer, watching the way the water broke over its back, the way the scars traced across its fins like pale rivers. They felt the silence of the moment, broken only by the slap of waves against wood and the faint hiss of foam. The shark lingered there, its shadow stretching beneath them, its body bearing the weight of a struggle it could not escape alone. And still its eye drifted toward them. Steady, unblinking, as though the quiet of its exhaustion had already carried it beyond fear. The fishermen, held in that gaze, knew the sea had offered them more than a glimpse of struggle. It had placed before them a life balanced on the edge of endurance, waiting for hands willing to lighten its weight. The boat rocked gently with the heave of the sea, each rise and fall carrying the weight of decision. The fishermen had gathered their tools, hooks dulled of barbs, knives worn smooth from years of use. They did not speak much, their words swallowed by the wind, but their movements told of a shared intent. Every hand was steady, every glance fixed on the shadow just beneath the surface. The whale shark lingered there, its great body turning slightly, as if suspended between surrender and endurance. The men leaned over the wooden edge, timing their reach with the sway of the vessel. Each time the boat dipped, their arms extended, ropes brushing against fingertips before slipping back into the pull of the waves. They worked without rush, knowing the ocean allowed no haste, only rhythm. The water slapped softly against the hull, marking the quiet pace of their task. The shark hovered almost motionless, its massive head rising until it broke the surface for a moment. Water streamed across its spotted skin, sunlight catching briefly on patterns as old as tides. Its gills opened and closed, a slow, laboring breath. The weight of the lines dragged along its side, yet it remained still, as though holding itself there for reasons unseen. The fishermen could read its exhaustion in the tremor of its tail, in the faint quiver along its dorsal fin. They knew that a single thrash could overturn their fragile balance, yet no violence came. Instead, the giant floated just below them, its presence filling the water with a steady calm. One of the men reached out, his knife glinting as he lowered it toward the rope. The motion was careful, each angle considered, each moment stretched by caution. The blade met the line, sawing gently, the fibers straining before loosening. The rope snapped free with a muted recoil, slipping away into the sea. The shark shifted slightly, a slow roll of its body, as though testing the absence of weight. The men watched, breath held, before the boat steadied again, and silence returned. Another rope trailed across its fin, cutting deep where the skin had grown raw. Two men leaned together, hooks catching the strand, lifting it closer to the surface. The shark tilted once, eye glancing upward, its gaze passing briefly over the wooden hull. The fisherman felt it linger, not in fear, not in anger, but in a quiet recognition of closeness. The waves lifted, then lowered, and again they reached. Knives slid against wet rope, the tension fighting them before yielding. Each cut was small, deliberate, a thread of freedom released into the shifting sea. The men did not cheer, did not mark progress aloud. Their voices remained hushed, one offering only a single phrase, spoken low and steady. Easy now. Beneath them, the shark drifted nearer the surface, its great back rising until droplets rolled down its skin. The water around it calmed for a brief moment, the surface smoothing as though the sea itself paused. The men leaned closer still, their tools catching glimmers of pale light as they worked in silence. Every gesture was matched to the rhythm of the ocean, the boat, and the quiet patience of the creature below. It was not trust as people might know it, but something simpler, an allowance, fragile and fleeting, given by a giant too weary to resist. The men met it with equal restraint, their hands careful, their movements soft, the sea carrying all sound but the steady breath of life beside them. And so they continued. Drawing close in silence, the bond between human and animal measured not in words, but in the calm endurance of a moment that belonged only to the vastness of the water and the weight of need. The sea grew restless as the men leaned further over the edge, its rhythm turning sharp, each wave slapping against the hull with force. The fishermen adjusted their footing, steadying themselves against the shifting pull. Their hands moved with a quiet urgency, not rushed, but attuned to the growing weight of time. The whale shark drifted just beneath them, its massive body heaving with slow breaths, the strain of rope and water holding it captive. The first line stretched taut across the dorsal fin, its fibers frayed from salt but still biting deep. One man lowered his knife, the blade trembling slightly in the surge. He steadied it, waiting for the right moment when the sea lifted him close enough. The edge pressed against the cord, and with a few careful strokes, the tension gave way. The rope slid loose, recoiling into the water with a muted snap. The shark shifted, a ripple running along its flank, its tail stirring the water with new space to move. The fisherman felt it, the sudden lessening of weight, like a held breath released. One whispered softly, almost to himself, "That's it. Easy now." His words barely rose above the roar of the surf, yet they carried across the narrow space between man and animal. Another rope bound the pectoral fin, digging into skin rubbed raw by the drag of the sea. Two men leaned together, hooks catching the sodden strand. Their shoulders braced against each swell as they lifted it closer. The shark rolled slightly, the great eye opening and closing in a weary rhythm, its body allowing the contact, though every tremor showed exhaustion. Knives sawed steadily, water streaming over their hands until the cord broke free. It slid down the length of the fin, vanishing into the waves. The ocean did not ease. A gust drove spray across the boat, stinging eyes and skin, yet the men kept their focus fixed. They knew each rope cut was a step toward life, each mistake a step toward harm. Silence filled the spaces between their movements, broken only by the scrape of steel on fiber and the heavy sound of water rushing past. One final strand wound cruelly around the base of the tail, thick with knots hardened by salt. This line resisted every tug, every careful pull. The shark's body jerked faintly with the pressure, tail rising before sinking again. The fishermen exchanged glances, unspoken understanding passing between them. One crouched low, waiting until the next swell lifted the shark close, then reached deep with his blade. The sea surged, threatening to tear the knife from his grip, but he held firm, sawing slow, deliberate strokes. At last, the line parted. The end lashed once, then slipped into the depths. The shark gave a slow roll, its massive frame adjusting as if rediscovering its own weight. Freed from the cords, its movement spread wider, tail sweeping with new reach. Still, it lingered near the surface, hovering, body heaving with each labored breath. The men withdrew their hands, tools resting against the deck, their eyes fixed on the water. They did not celebrate, did not raise voices against the noise of the storm. Instead, they stood in quiet stillness, watching the release settle into the sea. The ropes had been cut, but the marks remained, scars that told of struggle, of endurance, of the fragile balance between survival and loss. The waves continued to rise and fall, but within that turbulence a softer calm held. The shark moved slowly, no longer bound, yet still close enough for the men to see its shadow drifting beneath the swell. It lingered there, suspended in the living water, as though listening to the hushed voices that had guided it through pain and into freedom. For a moment, the sea held its breath. The whale shark floated just beneath the surface, vast and unmoving, as though the long hours of struggle had hollowed the strength from its body. The fishermen waited, their hands resting against the boat's edge, no longer reaching, no longer cutting. They knew their work was finished, yet the silence stretched, heavy with uncertainty. The water rocked against the hull, carrying both the memory of strain and the fragile promise of release. Then, with a slow turn, the giant shifted. Its pectoral fins spread wider, testing their freedom, no longer bound by cords. A ripple moved along its mottled back, the pale constellations of its skin catching flashes of muted light beneath the swell. Its gills expanded deeply, drawing water in heavy rhythm, and the vast tail began to stir. The first stroke was hesitant, weighed down by exhaustion, but the next carried more certainty, more power rediscovered in the open water. The men remained still, their eyes following the immense shadow as it drifted forward. No voice rose above the sea. No cheer broke the quiet. One man murmured only, "Go on now." His words lost to the waves almost as soon as they were spoken. It was less command than benediction, a gentle offering given to the water itself. The whale shark descended slightly, its great head angling down toward the deeper swell. A faint curve traced through its body, graceful despite the fatigue carved into every line of its movement. It swam not with haste, but with the steady rhythm of a creature remembering its place in the current. Wounds marked its fins where the ropes had cut, lines that would remain as part of its story, but now the sea held it without burden, carrying it back into the vastness it belonged to. For a time, the fishermen could still see it beneath the shifting waves. Its shadow stretched long, moving further with each sweep of the tail. The storm that had threatened all afternoon softened slightly, the winds easing as the horizon opened into shades of gray-blue distance. The water calmed around them, though the memory of its force lingered in their muscles, in their clothes heavy with spray. One by one, they set their knives aside. The tools, sharp and salt-worn, were no longer needed. What mattered now was not in their hands, but in the water beyond, where the giant moved with a quiet strength renewed. They leaned on the rail, saying nothing more. The silence between them filled with the weight of what they had seen and the relief of what had passed. The shark's shape grew smaller, dissolving into the deeper hues of the ocean. At last it slipped beyond sight, leaving only the restless rise and fall of the sea. Yet in that absence there was no emptiness. There was instead a presence carried inward, of trust offered, of life preserved, of the fragile threads that bound human hands to the survival of something vast and wild. The fishermen lingered, not hurrying to start their engines or cast their nets again. Their eyes stayed on the horizon, where the creature had vanished, each man holding the quiet knowledge that the sea had let them be witnesses to a moment that would not return. Above them, the clouds broke slightly, a muted light spilling across the water. It spread in ripples, soft and silver, carrying their gaze outward to the horizon where the endless sea met sky. Somewhere beyond, the whale shark swam unbound, its path unknown, yet its freedom certain. And in the hush of that moment, the only sound was the low breath of waves rolling toward shore, carrying the memory of a giant released.